Hi, everybody. Martin Root with Project Heaven on Earth and this week's Heaven Maker. I think you're going to find this very interesting. Dr. Cheryl Clark, an old-time friend, so I'll call her Sherry. Hi, Sherry. Welcome to being the Heaven Maker video.
Thank you, Martin. That's really fun.
Tell everyone, we met at a conference at which I spoke about Heaven on Earth. And you were fascinated by it, and you decided that you wanted me to come into your workplace. And your workplace was a very unique workplace. What was that?
Well, I worked in prisons. The last 36 years of my career, I've worked in prisons every week. And I believed, based on what I heard you say, that I had created heaven on earth in prison. That was my mission. And so I wanted you to come see it and check it out and see what you thought.
And so I did, and it was a prison for young adult offenders in upstate New York. And I must admit I was a little scared coming in because they check you all over and you can't take a cell phone in. And I mean, it's a prison. It's not...
you have to go through gates and locks and clanging, all kinds of stuff. It was definitely a prison.
And tell me, but not only was this a prison, this was a special prison in the sense of you were in charge of a program there that was, I thought, very unique. Tell us about how this program was set up and what its purpose was.
Okay. The program was shock incarceration, and it operated in 5 correctional facilities in New York State. You were in the largest, and the facility that was also the mustering facility, bringing all the offenders in to send them, either keep them at Lakeview or send them out to the other shock facilities in the state. Shock incarceration was started by the legislature in the state of New York to treat and educate specially selected young, nonviolent felony offenders serving their first term of state incarceration. So these were people who had never been in prison before. They might have been in jail. Their primary offenses were something related to drugs, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, sales, those kinds of things. Low-level, nonviolent offenses.
Sales of drugs, not just sales.
Sales of drugs, yes, definitely. Drug sales. When you're working in prison, that's the sales you're talking.
There are no other sales. I get it.
Well, none that are relevant.
Right.
You know,
and
you don't got.
The folks were in this program, men and women, for how long, and what was what did you do with them in there?
Okay, the program was designed to be a 6-month intensive experience that included substance abuse treatment, academic education, self-discovery, decision-making and choices, work, and community living. So it was a positive environment for human development in a caring community. That's what the philosophy says.
Phenomenal.
And staff were specially trained to work in this environment. It was a standard prison for New York State, a standard medium security prison that you went to. But within that prison, we had created this environment that really supported people to be the best they could be. And that was the whole intention of the program. It was to treat and release the offenders in less than their court-mandated minimum periods of incarceration and release them without creating a greater risk to the community. So we had to be very intense and very focused during the 6 months, and we had a really good aftercare program that kept supporting them as they got out to help them reintegrate into the community. So someone could be sentenced to as much as 3 years to life in prison because of the way the drug laws were at the time, and by actively participating and successfully completing the shock incarceration program, could be released within 6 months of their participation in the program.
So
Program operated from 5:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. We had mandated sleeping. They had to be able to sleep because some of them were under 21. They had to be able to have rest for 8 hours a night. So from 9:30 to 5:30, they slept. And for 6 months, they worked in groups as platoons. They worked in small groups. They went to academic school. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that in less than a quarter of the time in traditional education programs, these offenders participating were better than twice as successful as people in surrounding facilities. So in 1 month in a shock incarceration facility, we issued more high school diplomas than surrounding facilities issued in a year.
And so obviously the benefit to me as an inmate was, rather than serving a long time, I'm going to go through whatever you want me to go through because I'm going to get out in 6 months. And I saw how intense it was. I mean, you did not fool around in the sense that people could fail, right? They could be kicked out.
Yes.
They could self-select out.
Yes.
But the people who stayed in, it was transformational, period.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you saw me do the Heaven on Earth presentation, and then you invited me in, A, because you wanted me to see the facility, which I was thrilled with, but B, you wanted me to do the Heaven on Earth presentation to the correctional officers. Why? Right. What was your thinking there?
Well, their role was one of the key roles in the program because the inmates were with a corrections officer for 16 hours a day. It was either the drill instructor who woke them up in the morning, the work supervisor, or the officer who worked with them throughout the day to take them back and forth to their various programs, or it was the 4 to 12 officer, the 4 p.m. to midnight officer, who taught many of the classes. And so it was a way of having the officers see that it wasn't just our ideas, but that it was really a global concept, a concept that was bigger than all of us, that we create our own realities and see the people we were working with, both the inmates and the staff in many cases, did not have a belief that they were in charge of their own lives. They were good employees. They were dedicated to their jobs when they were employees. The inmates were doing the best they could because many of them came into the program. The average entry grade level was 5th grade education. Now that's very young.
Yeah.
When you're coming into the 5th grade, you're about 11 or 12. So many of them, they were anywhere from 16 to as old as 35 at the time you came to the program. They can be as old as 50 now. But when you came into the program, the most of the people in the program were under 21 years old. And so these were people who had given up on themselves at 11 or 12 and came into this program, and instead of a correctional officer who was just there to keep the count correct, and all of our officers did have to keep the count correct, but they were also there as teachers and role models and leaders in this program, and they created the environments that allowed these inmates to thrive and succeed.
What was interesting to me is when you invited me, I remember thinking, what? Heaven on earth in a prison? No, that will... And then I stopped myself, and I remember saying, no, what difference does it make where it is? If there's an opening here, and what I saw when I was in the program was the commitment that you had and all the correctional officers, they wanted these kids' lives turned around. And when you think, if you think of a metaphor of being in prison, in a sense, you can think of our world as being imprisoned by our belief system that we can't have. Right, that we can't have the kind of world we want, which is really what Heaven on Earth is addressing. So here, in a sense, is one of the most extreme examples of that. And we go in, you invite me in to talk specifically about Heaven on Earth. And I remember, talk a little bit about, well, first of all, what was the reaction of the COs, correctional officers? before I came in when you introduced the topic? And then what did they say about the session?
Well, they believe they were doing heaven on earth. They hadn't heard the term,
right?
But they knew that it was the best job in the system. That they were paid the same money. They were responsible for the same security duties. But this was a job that people didn't leave. We had people who stayed long past their 25 years because they loved the job. This was a job that when they first came into it, they were thinking, no, everybody wasn't into the shock incarceration model. Everybody wasn't, true believers. But the ones that you saw were people who had seen it work for a number of years by the time you came there. They knew they could make it work. And they were proud of the inmates they worked with because they saw them for the full 6 months. They worked with them from the time they got off the bus coming into the prison to the time they graduated. In those graduations, everybody was standing tall. Everybody was proud. And the inmates would stand up and say, I'm most grateful for my drill instructor. I'm most grateful for Sergeant so-and-so. I'm most grateful for the superintendent. They really, really created a community in this prison that was, in some cases, difficult for them to carry over into the community because they were going back into neighborhoods that weren't as positive and weren't as focused. So in many ways, it became easier as they went through to stay focused on a positive environment. But there were rules about how they spoke, how they talked to each other. We didn't use profanity. We didn't talk people down. One of the things that the program was designed to do was build people up. Yep. Now, there's intense times when you're breaking through images, when people got confronted very hard, emotionally, all of those different kinds of things that happened. But the truth is that the whole purpose was to have people standing tall and being focused on where they wanted to go in their lives. And so I had incorporated things that I had learned. I think one of the times that I did a presentation to the group that we both belong to, that I stood up in front of the room and said, I spent 36 years in prison and I belong there because I stole from all of you and I took it into prison with me. So anything that anybody had taught me, all the things that I learned, I took it into prison and taught it to the staff, and the staff taught it to the inmates. And so we just kept creating this positive environment for human development. And I've been doing that since before shock. The last 23 years of my career was in this specialized environment because when the commissioner saw the housing units that I'd been working in before, I remember him asking me one day, Clark, why can't they all be this way? And I said, well, they can. And he said, well, how would you do it? I said, you train staff, you monitor, you evaluate, and you have inmates who are volunteer and willing to be there and do what's demanded of them, because there's a lot demanded of them. They don't get a free ride. They have to earn their 6 months of release. So they're participating from 5:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. Whatever the program is, they're participating.
Sherry, the model, I know all of this, what you've just told me, but I'm just sitting here feeling so inspired, thinking what's the word I want? The imagery of people being in prison and turning their lives around with focus and standing up tall, that model for the rest of the world. We think in the same way people thought initially, you can't do anything with prisoners. Well, that's been proven wrong. And now, in the same way, what Heaven on Earth, Project Heaven on Earth is saying is, we can't do anything with the world. We don't agree with it. I know you don't. I know I don't. I know those correctional officers don't. And many of the prisoners didn't as well, those young people. And right. Turning it around to have all of us move forward. And I love your two phrases, with focus and standing tall. So we're proud of humanity.
Yes, yes. And they know they can make a difference because they make a difference in their own lives. Their 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 discipline, which a lot of people misinterpret discipline as punishment. Discipline is meeting a standard of excellence.
Very good.
That's what discipline is. It's staying focused on what you've been taught and maximizing that in your life. And so I have people who still to this day, even though I've been retired almost 6 years, I still have people calling me up every now and then, or I run into them. I just ran into somebody on a Zumba cruise who said, "Ma'am, don't I know you?" I said, "Well, you call me ma'am, so you do." And she said she was in shock incarceration, and she was working on this cruise boat, and we're dancing away, and she says it was the best thing I ever did. I mean, I bump into people, but they call me and they say, "Today is my 26th graduation." Wow. 26th anniversary of my graduation. 26 years for a person whose average statistical stay in prison was supposed to be 10 years. They were out in 6 months, and they're still out 26 years later. I mean, it's phenomenal.
I remember you telling me the story of you and the superintendent once in New York City. And
yeah.
This guy came running up to you and snapped to attention. It was
on the street. On the street. "Sir, ma'am." on Park Avenue. It was Park Avenue.
Even better.
We were walking to a meeting. "Sir, ma'am," snapped to attention. And we were in a restaurant one day, and a cook who's going to be 57 tomorrow.
Wow.
When she was in the program, we're sitting in this restaurant in New York City, and she walks past the table and snaps to attention and says, "Sir, ma'am, remember me?" And she was the worst. She had tried everything to get herself thrown out of the program, couldn't do it. And here she is 6 months later, bringing over her boss and all the people working, and says, and Superintendent Mozicki at the time said, "She's introducing us, our prison guards. She's introducing us to people." And the owner and the manager both came over and said, "You send me all you got. Wow. I'll hire every single one of them." And that particular restaurant chain, because there were 6 of them in the city, that particular restaurant chain consistently hired shock graduates because they knew they'd come to work on time, they'd do an excellent job, they'd stay focused, and they cared about people. I mean, Burger King, the Burger King window one night, I was taking my niece to Burger King, and the guy looks, "Dr. Clark, is that you?" In the Burger King window, picking up my niece's Whopper. I see them everywhere. I see people everywhere.
Sherry, I'm just noticing my own reaction here. I'm full of light. I'm full of joy. All we want truly is that we want the world to work. That gives us great, great pleasure.
Right.
Sherry, anything else? Any advice for the listeners, viewers? Anything you want to say? Final words.
There's a quote that I use from Rolling Thunder all the time. That he was a shaman, and he said, "People have to be responsible for their thoughts. So first, they need to watch their words and speak with good purpose only." That to me is the essence of heaven on earth, that we pay attention to our highest thoughts and we work toward realizing our highest thoughts. And that was the whole purpose of shock incarceration. It's the whole purpose of everything I do, is to just stay focused on the light.
Beautifully said. Thanks for being a heaven maker, Sherry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I like that. I like that. I'm going to put that on my resume.
With pleasure. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, Martin.
Bye-bye.